That song reminds me that what we're all here for is to go back home. And it happens in here, not out there. It's not a trip that you take somewhere. It's a journey that you take inward. And so thank you, Katrina and Tony, for that, okay? For the last few weeks, or a couple of weeks, we've been talking about hot topics. And I think they're going to get hotter and hotter. But anyway, last week, or 2 weeks ago, we talked about the power of nonviolence and how we can be nonviolent by making observations rather than making judgments, by sharing our feelings. And then last week we talked about the faces of invisible racism. And in that situation, what we really talked about is the not just how it shows up in government, how it shows up in various institutions, but more important, how does it show up in us? And how do we, in some ways, deny it within ourselves when we really need to look ourselves square in the mirror, if you would, and say, yeah, I've got some of that. I have some of that in different ways, but it's not overt. It's not mean. It just is the way I think, and I have to learn to recognize that. And today, we're talking about human trafficking. And it can be maybe a touchy topic. There are a lot of, I think, areas where we can improve this whole area. I'll be talking about a few of those. But what I've done is, thanks to wingclips.com, I have downloaded free a couple of videos that share the facts, if you would, about human trafficking. And let us know that it's not just in the area of prostitution, but it's also in the whole area of agriculture, in fishing industry, here in America also. But we'll give you a few information on that. So Rob, if you would, let's go ahead and play that first video and get a little more information about this issue.
Scott, nice to meet you. Scott and I and about like 17 other photojournalists. In 2007, we went on a trip around the world, and we were studying social injustice and how to raise awareness using media. The book was kind of a reflection of everything that we saw, but human trafficking was one of the main things that we saw internationally. So when we were writing the book, we realized that there was trafficking in America. So we would like to know, what does trafficking look like in America?
It's everywhere. Experts estimate that as many as 17,000 to 18,000 people are trafficked across international borders in the United States. But that is the minority of the trafficking that takes place here. The vast majority of trafficking is domestic trafficking. It's trafficking of people who were born in the United States, who grew up in the United States. Most trafficking, human trafficking, is for the purposes of prostitution. The average age of entry into prostitution in the United States is 13 to 14. That means most people who end up in prostitution start out as children, actually start out as trafficked children.
It's now rated the third largest form of organized crime. They think it's a $10 billion business. It's preceded only by the sale of drugs and the sale of weapons.
We've learned that these kids really are slaves, that they can't walk away, that they're being used as commodities for sale or trade.
Have you seen that the problem is getting worse, or is it just more understanding of it coming out now, or what are your findings?
We try to be very conservative. We try to only use numbers that we can defend and for which there's actual proof. We believe we can prove with a high degree of confidence that there are at least 100,000 American kids a year who are the victims of child prostitution and child trafficking. These are runaways. These are kids who are preyed upon on the streets by people offering them shelter or comfort or love, who then find themselves trapped in a situation from which they can't escape. They become literally 21st century slaves.
So Ben, you've traveled all over the world documenting slavery. How would you say the situation compares in America to what you've seen around the world?
America, in a sense, is a microcosm of all the different forms of slavery that you see around the world. If you take a look at the world picture, the vast majority of slaves are in some form of debt bondage. They're in carpet looms, they're in brick kilns, they're in quarries. That's not the case in the United States. In the United States, the plurality of people who are trapped in some form of slavery are trapped in forced commercial sex.
Atlanta's finding around 300 kids a month. Dallas is finding around 200 or 300 kids a month who are in the sex trade. So if you look at major cities and you're seeing that volume and you begin to spread that across the country, you begin to see higher and higher and higher numbers.
And in the United States, it doesn't just happen in New York and Los Angeles and Las Vegas. It's happening in small towns. It's happening in middle America. The only way not to find this problem in any city is simply not to look for it.
You know, so often in Unity, we really want to look at the positive, and we want to focus on the positive. We're going to do some of that today, okay? But I think sometimes we really have to look life again, look at it and be aware of what's going on. In Richmond, Virginia, the number is about 130 a month, children who are going into a form of slavery, and that's what we're talking about here, a form of slavery, the 21st century slavery that's taking place in America and throughout the world. And it's growing, as it indicated here. It's growing in such a way that the people who are in slavery don't know how to get out and can't figure out how to get out. And what happens, I think, is, again, we get confused. We put the prostitute in jail, and we allow the pimp or the John, is what they call it, to bail them out. They can walk right in and bail them out. And nobody does anything about that. But instead, they prosecute the victim rather than prosecuting those who are creating this circumstance. It blows my mind. And the other thing, it kind of reminds me of, there were the Pharisees brought a woman before Jesus. And in essence, they were saying she was a prostitute and she was condemned to death, which was the rule back then. And this is a big game changer where Jesus had a different way of looking at this. And so he just looked at all of them. He drew a line in the sand, and he said, anybody who is without sin, cast the first stone. And they all walked away. What Jesus was doing there was saying, this person is valuable. This person may be under circumstances they don't want to be under, and life has happened in such a way that that's where they are. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do as a society is recognize that every person has this value, including the prostitute, including the pimp, including those who, in agriculture, by the way, in America, there have been a number of cases that actually have been prosecuted successfully, who are keeping agricultural workers in a form of slavery, sometimes actually in slavery. And it's happening in the fishing industry in America. So it is happening in America, and it's beginning to grow not just from the area of prostitution, but also all the way through the area of agriculture and fishing today, and who knows what's next. But I think, most of all, that there are some things that we can do about this, and I think there's some teachings in Unity on how we can go about it. I have another little film clip that I'm going to ask Rob to run, which talks about what can we do? What can we do? Because, these things are big, to say the least. And how do we take on the second largest criminal industry in the world today? And most of you probably when you walked here didn't know that. I don't know. Some of you may. It was a jar to me. I was just amazed by it as I started to look at this. And by the way, these titles, these ideas that I'm talking about, these thoughts that I'm bringing forth, these situations that I'm bringing forth came from college campuses here in Richmond, Virginia, VCU and University of Richmond. I talked to some students and said, what do you guys talk about? What's on your mind? What are you concerned about? And these were the top 4 issues that we'll be talking about, okay? So there was some reason behind this. The other reason, I think, is because I want to understand how, as a truth student, how, as a Unity student, we deal with these things. and how does it affect us as we look at our principles and our teachings. So, Rob, let's go ahead and play this next one, which is what can we do about this? What can you do about this?
What can the average person actually do to help fight this issue?
Lincoln used to say that you move America by establishing a common thought. And you really have to establish the thought before the country says, okay, I see that and I'm willing to move. And that's the most important step in the process.
At the end of the day, it's a cultural shift. When we get to the point where everybody understands that real men don't buy sex, at that point we're going to be making a real difference on demand.
Because really the problem is not the police, it's not the policymakers, it's us. We drive justice. We ordinary people.
I don't think people recognize the power individuals have when they'll lock into something and say, okay, this is going on in Chicago, or this is going on in San Antonio, and I don't like it. Often 10 people organized can change a state.
Once you get people understanding that, yes, we have the power and capacity to really make significant change, the laws fall into place, the enforcement falls into place. So the real object is to mobilize and inspirit people.
Once you know the truth, you can't sit in silence now, because at that point silence is complicity. You're now part of the problem.
We can create an informed grassroots movement, not just an outraged one, but an informed grassroots movement that knows what to ask for.
Like anything, it starts with one step in the right direction, and as Margaret Mead said, never believe that one or a group of committed people can't make a difference, because indeed that's the only way we have ever made a difference in this world.
There was a common thread through that I heard anyway. And that common thread basically was that it takes a change in culture, a change in attitude, a change in our thinking in order to work on this issue and have change take place. Now, for me, that falls right in alignment with what Unity teaches. You know, the law of mind action, one of our 5 principles. What we think about, how we think about it, makes a difference. And so what I want to do is kind of move in a little different direction. I'm not getting off topic, I don't think. I'll bring it back. But it may feel like it does a little bit, because I want to talk about some of the teachings of Unity and how we can use those teachings in order to make a difference in our world. You know, one of the things we say is we are transformed lives transforming the world. And we have to ask ourselves, are we that? And I think we are. Because as our lives are transformed, our thinking is transformed, we become more alert, more aware, and more concerned and more compassionate about others. These young women, and young men also, children, are either caught on the streets because they've run away, and in some cases parents have actually booted them out of the house, and they don't have anywhere to go, and they don't know where to turn, and the person they turn to is the person who offers them food, offers them safety, supposedly, offers them a way of income, supposedly, and really moves them and puts them in a form of slavery. The other thing, by the way, is proactive also. If a child is on the streets and put in jail for vagrancy, for example, and that's what they do with them, but anyway, what will happen is that those in the industry go and bail those children out and then take over. So it's proactive also. Now, let's come back for a second to Unity principles. And what I want to talk about this morning is mind and consciousness. A few definitions. Divine mind. Divine mind in Unity is the starting point of every act and thought and feeling that is positive, that is divine in nature. That's divine mind. Many of us taught it to be called God, be called the Father, as Jesus called it. But that's divine mind. It's a divine nature that we have been created in and that we actually are. You see, God is mind, and we cannot describe God. And therefore, we cannot describe mind. Charles Fillmore said that about 80 years ago. Scientists today are trying to describe consciousness and mind. And most of them are agreeing they cannot describe it. It's not describable. And neuroscientists are also trying to do that, and they're agreeing. It's not describable. Because there's something about knowing ourselves, something about self-awareness, even if it is a self-awareness that we would like to get out of, okay? Knowing that and sensing that there's something that comes from somewhere and we don't know where it is. And in Unity and in New Thought, we call it divine mind. We call it God. We call it a lot of different names. We call it the universe. But it is a force that's inside of us and outside of us that we call this mind. There is also an affirmative state of mind. An affirmative state of mind is that state of mind whereby we are in alignment in the universe with divine mind, where we are living our lives in such a way that unconditional love is more important than conditional love, where peace is more important than anger, where forgiveness is more important than resentment. You see, it's an area that we live in our beingness and where we manifest those attributes that we call God, the attributes of God. God is love and we are loving. God is wisdom and we are wise. And so we see that and know that and understand that, and it starts to, in a little way, change our minds. Also in the brain, there is error thinking. Paul called that carnal mind. And it is really, Charles Fillmore said, the misuse of our mind powers, our ability to think in a positive way. It's a misuse of that, so it comes out negative. It is more based on senses than it is on our time in meditation, our time in prayer, our time in learning how to relate to and be a part of this universal thing we call God. And so, many times, mortal mind is the brain being misdirected. It is the brain believing that what we see, the senses, is the real thing. And we get trapped in that. And so we make mistakes. And that's all we do. We make mistakes. And when we make those mistakes, we either suffer, or we find ourselves in pain, or we feel like we are separated from God. When we aren't truly. There is no separation of divine mind. You are divine mind when you are aware of it. And so we have this fixed state of mind, and these are ideas and thoughts and words and actions that really are hard to change because we accept it as real. It is fixed in our mind, fixed in our society. And that's what we're seeing today. The idea of human trafficking, you see, is if it were overt as a form of slavery, we wouldn't put up with that today. We don't put up with slavery today. But since it's covert, it's happening, and sometimes we just aren't aware enough or alert enough to know what's going on. And it's happening in all of our neighborhoods. It's happening, again, in our lives indirectly. So there are three phases of mind we teach in Unity. One is what we call the conscious mind. This makes up everything that you are aware of. If you are aware that you're a child of God, that's in your conscious mind. You're aware of that. If you are aware that you are love and created in love, then that's what you are. So conscious does not mean bad. It just means you're aware of who and what you are. You also, sometimes in the consciousness, we're not aware of who we are. We're not aware of our core values. So they come from our subconscious mind. They come from our experiences and how we've taught and how we perceived our experiences. And so we have to understand that in the conscious mind, there is also, not only is there perfect thinking, divine thinking, but there's also error thinking at times. The third type of consciousness, the second type of consciousness is subconsciousness. That's where your core values are. That's the thing that we don't understand why we react as we do sometimes, why we respond to things as we do sometimes. We just do it kind of on automatic. We've all done that. It's because we have a core value within us that we haven't really examined and stepped up to. And that takes work. That's called the shadow side. And it's healthy, by the way. There's nothing wrong with the shadow side. The only way to get rid of it is to bring it up and examine it when we need to. And so we have this idea of consciousness. And then the third type is what Unity calls super consciousness, what New Thought calls superconscious. Superconsciousness is the consciousness of divine mind that dwells within us on an ongoing basis, whether we want it or not. It's there. It's who we are. We can't get away from it. But we don't always recognize it. And the more we allow superconsciousness to penetrate our subconsciousness and make change in the way we are thinking, the more that our consciousness changes from one of fear to one of love. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, so what we have to start to understand is that a change in consciousness is the key to spiritual growth. Spiritual growth is the key to social change. Because when we grow spiritually, there are two things that happen. One, we kind of get ourselves fixed. You've been through that, some of you, and maybe you're still working on it. You get yourself fixed, and you feel better about yourself, but you still got some work to do. But let me tell you that when we step out and take some risk by serving others, by supporting others, by affirming who they are, we then continue to grow spiritually, and I think at even a higher rate, in a higher way. Because we get outside of ourselves. We allow ourselves to do that. And that's when we can make a difference. That's when we are the difference, as Gandhi said. And what we need to learn to do is to take the illusion that sensual ideas are more satisfying than divine ideas and move that into the understanding that all the things that the senses look for, in most cases, are to satisfy a temporary need. Whereas spiritual growth satisfies a permanent need, an innate need to be one with that which created you. Now, what does all of this have to do with this idea of human trafficking? First and foremost, we have to be aware that it's happening. Otherwise, we're sticking our heads in the sand. The second thing is that we must be able, and this is the tougher part, is to affirm that each and every person involved in this is a child of God. That they are in a sense of error consciousness. It's not negative, not bad, it just is. And they're doing these things because they don't know a better way. They think this is the way to solve their problems. You see, you and I get caught out in little things, what we call little things, because we are fortunate enough, we really are fortunate enough as a whole, to not have been involved or not be captured or not be a slave physically. But sometimes mentally we are slaves. And when we get rid of that, we now can help others mentally get rid of this concept of slavery or human trafficking. An illumined consciousness, a mind purified by the light of truth. The law of mind action, the third principle in unity. First, there is God, one presence, one power. Second, there is that God is within you. Third, the power of mind action. That means that what I focus on and what I am conscious of and what I focus on in an affirmative way will come about in my life and, by the way, in others' lives too. So if I affirm and see our society changing, if I see better laws, and they're taking place now, and I'm sorry to say, but Virginia was the last one to put it on the books, but anyway, We did get it in our books last year, whereby, and it's not a law that says we're going to arrest people. It's a law that says we're going to help people get out of the slavery. We're going to find safe houses. We're going to find places they can be. We're going to find ways in which we can support hotlines and that kind of thing. And so it's money being funneled into positive areas of change, not areas of justice, as we call it sometimes, whereby we're going to use the penal system in order to correct all of our problems, which doesn't work. So, and we know that. So anyway, what we want to do is, first and foremost, is change our perception of those trapped in any form of slavery. They are, and I don't use the word victim very often, but they are victims. And as they come out of that, as they get that opportunity to come out, as we become more alert and aware, as we as a country who says, no, this is not acceptable behavior, then what will happen is that there will be ways in which they can get rid of that victim role and step into the Christ consciousness role. Become understanding that they are divine mind, that they are children of God, that they are children of the universe, that they are good and worthy. That's the message, and that's the affirmation we have to hold, I think, in our mind. If your heart leads you to do so, what you might want to do is join or support organizations that are making a positive change in the area of human trafficking. Polaris Project is one. There are a number of others. And you might want to be a part of that in some form or fashion. The only thing I would say is that organization starts to be against something, and I mean this with all my heart, nothing wrong with the organization, but don't join. Be part of organizations that are for something, for the change in a positive way and making a positive way. That's what we teach. That's who we are. We are affirmative people. We are believing that change can take place. Be aware. Be alert. Love your children, love our children. All of them. Teach them that they are loved. And I don't care how difficult it gets at home. Don't kick them out. Don't chase them away. And boy, is that hard sometimes. Between the 4 children we have, there have been a few times that we would like to kick them out. But we didn't act on that because that was in the moment, okay? That was era thinking, by the way, taking place. But that does happen. And so please, be aware. You know, if you knew that a next door neighbor was keeping somebody in bondage and slavery, literally, you'd report that, wouldn't you? I think we would. Somebody's next door neighbor is in that circumstance, and just be aware of it and be alert to it. About of the 300,000 people and 100,000 in America come into some form of human trafficking, about, as it said in the film, about 18,000 are carried overseas. And there are even ways in which you can have signs when you see somebody who's being captured that way, who's being managed that way. They have no luggage. They aren't dressed particularly properly. They aren't going to talk to you. They're not going to look at you in the eyes. And they are at the will of the person who's with them. Now, I haven't been aware that I've seen that, but I'm going to start looking there just to see. And if you see that, don't go and talk to the person, either one of them, okay? Go get some authorities to help you, because that's a dangerous situation potentially. But you can do something if you really believe something like that is going on. So be aware and be alert. And then we teach our children. We educate our communities that there's a better way. We teach our children that running away is not a good answer because here are the dangers of it. It's a conversation we ought to have with our children. We teach our children, like I said, that they are pure love. Positive, beautiful, wonderful, irritating at times. But that doesn't mean, because they get irritated with us too, by the way, that doesn't mean that we turn our backs on them. that we say, no, you're not a wonderful child, you're not a child of love because you acted this way today. We use unconditional love with our children just like we do with each other instead of conditional love. And so when we look at this whole area, and so many areas in our lives of human trafficking in particular, hold an image that this is an issue that is going to be resolved. It's not bigger than we are. We are bigger than the issue. Just because we look at it on a global basis, we think it is bigger than we are. But there's nothing bigger than divine mind. There's nothing more powerful than divine mind. And divine mind can only be exercised through each of you. And when we do it together, as Jesus said, when 2 or 3 are more in my name, together in my name, what happens is we become powerful beyond measure. Heavy topic. But I hope what you got this morning is that what you think, how you think, your consciousness, your ability to connect with divine mind can make a difference in an issue like human trafficking.